The asphalt shimmered with waves of heat, and the cosmos flowers lining the manicured greenbelts wilted under the oppressive sun. A few clusters closest to the concrete had surrendered entirely, their heads resting on the hot ground. An Omega, dressed in a crisp white shirt, stood near the entrance to the county clerk's office. He had a clean, refined look, and even in the inconspicuous sliver of shade he had claimed, passers-by would occasionally cast an appraising glance his way. He checked his watch, then glanced at a photo his mother had texted him, his gaze returning to the far end of the street. This was Liam, an Omega dutifully following his family's directive to enter into an arranged marriage. Just as the hands of his watch clicked to 10:20, a black Escalade finally appeared at the end of the road. The driver's door opened, revealing a pair of long, impeccably tailored legs. Following them up, one's eyes would meet the deep-set, sharply defined features of an alpha. The man was tall and carried himself with an air of authority. As soon as he was out of the car, he pulled out his own phone. The sun was directly overhead, making the screen difficult to see, and he frowned slightly. He was Ethan Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, nearly 27 and only now matched with a suitable Omega. It wasn't for a lack of options, but for years, the Alpha's world had revolved solely around his career. Work consumed him, leaving no room for romance. He stood by his car for a moment, still struggling to see the screen, before giving up and walking toward the government building. He registered the young man standing by the entrance with a fleeting glance, but something made him look again. It wasn't a profound thought, merely the natural appreciation one has for something beautiful. At the same time, Liam was observing the Alpha walking toward him. He watched as the man's gaze lingered on him for a brief second before he continued straight into the building. Liam hadn't gotten a clear look at his face, but since the man went directly inside, he figured he must be there on other business. The Omega dismissed him and crouched down in his corner again, resuming his watch. Once inside the building's shadow, Ethan could finally see his phone clearly. The moment the image came into focus, his mind instantly connected the person in the photograph with the Omega he had just seen outside. Without hesitating, Ethan turned and walked back out. His footsteps were light, and he was beside the Omega before the young man even noticed him. The proximity allowed Ethan a closer look. The Omega seemed lost in thought, his dark hair falling just over his brows, framing eyes that caught and reflected the sunlight. He wondered if this could really be the Omega he was meant to marry. For a reason he couldn't name, his heart beat a little faster. Just a little. Ethan's mind was still racing when he found himself standing directly in front of Liam. He asked bluntly if the young man was there to get a marriage license with him. Liam frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Seeing the Omega's perplexed expression, Ethan realized how abrupt he had been. He clarified his question with a touch of awkwardness, asking if Liam was perhaps his marriage partner. To be more specific, he added that his arranged partner was a Mr. Liam Sullivan. Liam finally got a clear look at Ethan's face and compared it to the photo from his family. This was him. The Omega was taken aback by the Alpha's polite but direct manner. He stammered that yes, that was him, and asked for the Alpha's name. Ethan introduced himself as Ethan Vance, and Liam reciprocated. They then formally exchanged business cards as if sealing a corporate deal. Liam then asked if they should proceed with the license. Ethan agreed that they might as well since they were both already there. And just like that, in a haze of formality, they were legally married. With the family alliance as the foundation, both men silently understood they would lead separate lives. Yet, neither Ethan nor Liam ever considered looking for anyone else. Ethan, as a CEO, was constantly buried in work and simply had no time. Besides, he was married now. Liam, whatever the circumstances, was his Omega, a part of the Vance family. Liam, on the other hand, had plenty of time, but his reasoning was simpler. He was lazy. As the old saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. If dating and romance were just the roads to the destination of marriage, and he was already standing in Rome, why bother walking the roads? The logic seemed perfectly sound to him. Furthermore, with several older brothers at home, the family business was never his concern. So, the Omega opened his own small bakery and settled into a comfortable, leisurely life. After the wedding, Liam rarely interfered in the Alpha's life. It was Ethan, however, who frequently contacted Liam, mostly because of obligatory dinners with the Vance family elders at their estate. Sometimes it was to coordinate outfits for a gala. Other times it was to pick Liam up from his bakery to present a united front for his relatives. One such evening, a steady rain was falling. The bakery had been slow, so as Liam was closing up, he packed a piece of a new cake he had been developing. The cake wasn't intended for the Alpha. They were due at the Vance estate again, and Ethan's mother had a fondness for sweets. The college student who worked part-time had already left, and with the cake box in one hand, Liam found it awkward to lock the shop door. He decided to place the cake on the passenger seat of Ethan's car first, then go back to lock up. Ethan had been running on fumes all day before coming to pick Liam up. The sight of the small cake on the seat next to him made his stomach rumble. He reasoned he would just have a small bite. But one small bite led to another, and by the time Liam returned, only the empty wrapper remained. The CEO felt a pang of embarrassment. After eating 3/4 of it, he had figured it would be worse to present his mother with a mangled piece of cake, so he had simply finished it off. Liam's baking was exceptional. It was work he loved, and it showed. The cake had been delicious, perfectly suited to the Alpha's palate. He liked it, but only a little, he told himself, because this was just an arrangement. His eyes drifted over to Liam. When the Omega saw the empty wrapper and looked at him with a questioning gaze, a wave of awkwardness washed over the Alpha. He quickly turned his gaze out the window, his voice a bit dry as he explained that he was just sampling it for his mother. Seeing the CEO's evasive glance, Liam was suddenly reminded of a small child caught stealing cookies. He ventured a question, asking if it was any good. Ethan's ears perked up. The Omega's tone didn't seem accusatory. He turned back to Liam and confirmed enthusiastically that it was delicious. He insisted that Liam had a real talent for it. Genuinely. A little flustered by the praise, Liam looked down and thanked him. The matter was dropped, and they drove on in silence. Liam was always conscious of the fact that their marriage was a contract. Even when Ethan was out late for business dinners, Liam never called, never pushed. He would simply leave a small piece of cake out for the Alpha, a little something to tide him over. If Ethan wasn't home by 10, Liam would go to bed. In their 3rd month of marriage, an unexpected heat hit Liam. He was at home at the time, and Ethan was working late again. Even if the Alpha had been home, it wasn't as if they were a real couple. Liam considered his options, and with his last shred of coherence, he dialed the number for their beta house manager, Mr. Davies. In his hazy state, he didn't check the contact name. The call went straight to the Alpha, who was in the middle of a board meeting. The meeting was just wrapping up. Ethan stood, suggesting they adjourn for the day, as they had a tough day ahead tomorrow. His phone, set to silent with no vibration, lay on the table beside him. He had not received the Omega's mistaken call. After the meeting, Ethan spoke with a few department heads before finally picking up his phone to head back to his office. He had a dinner planned with a business partner, and they walked toward the elevator together. But the partner suddenly announced he had to go home. When Ethan asked why, the man just smiled and pointed at his phone, saying the family was calling. The word family made Ethan, for some reason, think of his own arranged partner, and the delicious cake his partner made. The partner pressed the elevator button and kept glancing at his phone while they waited. He laughed, explaining that he hadn't checked his phone during the meeting and had already been summoned several times. The CEO frowned, detecting the undertone of fond exasperation in his partner's voice. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan hesitated before stepping in. He asked casually if his partner's spouse often called him home. The partner replied that he was kept on a tight leash. Ethan pressed further, asking if he was really managed like that. The partner complained that he was very clingy, needing to call if they were apart for even a short while. It was a hassle. But despite his words, the partner's steps were quick and eager. Ethan thought of his own family. His family never seemed clingy, never called him demanding his presence. Not that he wanted his Omega to be clingy. They were in an arranged marriage, after all. They should give each other space. It was just a contract, he told himself again and again. Yet his eyes kept drifting to his partner's phone. He found himself asking what his partner's spouse usually said, when they usually called, how many times. He wondered if it was a daily occurrence. The CEO cleared his throat, pulling his gaze away from the other man's phone with a performative cough. He wasn't envious, he explained, just curious. The partner just smirked. After seeing his partner off, the CEO returned to his office. He still hadn't looked at his own phone, assuming, as usual, that the Omega wouldn't have contacted him. Still, he couldn't resist a glance. The sight of 3 missed calls made him freeze. 3 of them. Could it be that his Omega was calling to summon him home? A small spark of anticipation ignited in his chest. Just a small one, of course. The Alpha didn't even bother to shut down his computer. He bolted from his office, dialing Liam's number as he strode toward the parking garage, listening to the ringing on the other end. There was no answer. He tried again. On his way, he ran into his business partner again. Ethan held up his phone, mouthing to the other man, "Family's calling me, too." On the 3rd attempt, the call finally connected. Liam was in agony, his voice broken and intermittent. A faint, questioning sound came through the line. Ethan's fingers tightened around his phone, the tips of his ears flushing red. He wasn't naive. The situation was not difficult to understand. There were no other sounds from the other end, only the Omega's suppressed, pained gasps, almost like sobs, and the rustling of fabric. In an instant, Ethan guessed that his Omega was likely in the throes of a heat. Not only that, but as he listened, he heard the distinct chime of a grandfather clock in the background. The clock in the living room of the villa they shared. Liam was at home. His Omega was at home, going through a heat, and instead of using suppressants, he had called him. What did that mean? The CEO asked himself and quickly supplied his own answer. Was his Omega this dependent on him? He had heard that Omegas became much clingier during their heats. Perhaps his Omega normally wanted to call him to tell him to come home. Even though it was just an arrangement, he could still help his Omega, the CEO thought. Besides, everyone said suppressants were bad for your health. Since the Omega was married to him, it was his duty to be there for him. And he would be very gentle. The CEO slipped in his Bluetooth earpiece, listening to the call while simultaneously searching for information on ABO bonding. He had never marked an Omega before. Some knowledge required a bit of practical research. In the less than 2 minutes since he had answered the call, the flush from his ears had spread across his face. He walked a few steps, then stopped, then walked a few more, one hand holding his phone while the other fiddled with his tie or poked at the bobblehead on his dashboard. His mind was racing, but comforting his Omega was the top priority. He was about to speak, to tell his Omega he was on his way home. But before he could say a word, a voice came from the other end. A weak hello? Liam was holding onto his last thread of sanity. His body was burning, but he was lucid enough to remember that he and the Alpha were only in a marriage of convenience. If his heat hadn't come on so suddenly, catching him completely off guard, he had planned to spend it in a specialized isolation room at a hospital. He had no intention of asking Ethan for help. He asked if this was Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies was the Beta house manager, an older man who had looked after the CEO for nearly 20 years. He asked the man he thought was on the line if he could bring him a suppressant. He struggled to form a complete sentence. He waited, but the kind, familiar voice of Mr. Davies never came. He asked again, his voice trembling slightly. Meanwhile, the person on the other end of the line was utterly confused. The CEO looked at his phone screen again and again, confirming that the call was indeed from his Omega. But this call wasn't for him? Mr. Davies? Suppressants? So his Omega, his family, would rather have a chemical injection than him? At the 24-hour pharmacy, he told the doctor he needed suppressants for an Omega. He presented his ID, then added, as if it were necessary, that they were for his family. He explained that his spouse had called specifically to ask him to get them. The doctor simply nodded. The CEO was still trying to process it. He wondered aloud why his partner would prefer suppressants over his help. The doctor and Alpha himself didn't know. Ethan looked at him and asked if he had an Omega. The doctor, his face obscured by a mask, stated that he did not. That explained it, Ethan declared with a look of smug superiority. He, on the other hand, did have an Omega. The CEO eventually left, reluctantly carrying 2 vials of suppressants. Well, not entirely reluctantly. He was just hoping he might trip and accidentally drop them, preferably shattering them. Then he could graciously offer a temporary mark. Even if it was an arranged marriage, as an Alpha, he had a duty to comfort his Omega. In exchange, though, he hoped his Omega would call him next time, not Mr. Davies. Back at the house, Liam had lost all strength after making the call. He was miserable, the room thick with his pheromones. Thankfully, betas were unaffected by them, which was why he had called the house manager. The sound of a door opening made Liam's red-rimmed eyes flutter open. His voice was weak as he called out for Mr. Davies. There was no reply. He opened his eyes a little wider and his gaze met Ethan's at the doorway. In truth, Ethan hadn't failed to answer. He was too stunned to. His marriage to the Omega was based on family interests, but also on their high compatibility rating. The moment he opened the door, the Alpha was nearly rooted to the spot. The Omega's pheromones washed over him in waves. Making it worse, Liam was looking directly at him, his light-colored eyes shimmering with moisture, like a lake stirred by the wind. The CEO stared, and the ripples on the lake's surface grew more intense. Liam only felt worse. He couldn't control his pheromones, and he had no energy. He felt as if the air itself was a physical presence, caressing his ankles, his neck, even his gland. The corners of his eyes grew redder, a single tear clinging to his lashes. The CEO subtly hid the suppressants behind his back. He wanted to see more ripples on that lake, wanted a storm to break, for the water to churn and crash. He would hold the Omega, kiss away his tears, and then leave his mark. Liam, struggling to stay lucid, asked why he was there. Ethan held up his phone and shook it slightly, explaining that Liam had called the wrong number. Liam closed his eyes, berating himself for his carelessness. He raised a hand, intending to wave the Alpha away. He wanted to apologize, but before the word was even out, he found himself pulled into an eager embrace. The CEO's eyes lit up. Holding his Omega, he took his hand and asked if holding him like this was okay. Or maybe this way was better. The Alpha shifted his hands lower, so excited he was clumsy. He stammered that he wasn't very experienced, and told Liam to let him know if he was uncomfortable. What was happening? Ethan held his Omega, his own calming alpha pheromones blanketing the other man. So, his Omega was this clingy after all, wanting a hug right away. Pheromones bloomed in the bedroom. The CEO pulled the Omega closer, asking if he could really soothe him. He admitted he hadn't done it before but promised he'd just been studying up. He swore he was a better option than any suppressant, and begged Liam to give him a try. The night grew deeper. Pheromones spread through the room like waves, crashing against unseen shores and breaking into layers of foam. In the midst of it all, Ethan held his Omega tight. The Omega tilted his head back, tears clinging to his lashes. The CEO reached up and kissed them away. He told him not to cry, that it would be over soon. One hand held the Omega's waist, exposing the pale skin of his neck. The Omega's unmarked gland was faintly flushed. The CEO felt a rare surge of nervousness. He bent his head, his hot breath ghosting over the sensitive skin. Liam couldn't bear it and tried to pull away, but he was held even tighter. The Alpha's pheromones were soothing now as he gently licked the gland. Just as his teeth were about to pierce the skin, his voice became muffled. He promised it would be quick, just a minute, though the words sounded a bit off. But Liam was clearly soothed by them. He urged him to be fast. The Omega was drenched in the Alpha's pheromones, as if he had been soaking in orange soda all summer long. A temporary mark left him weak. He clutched at the Alpha's sleeve, trying to make him stop, but the sight of his flushed, tear-stained face only made the Alpha lose more control. And so 1 minute stretched into an eternity. For the first time since their marriage, they spent the night in the same room. The next day, the alarm went off 3 times, and neither of them moved. When Liam finally woke up, his head was still pillowed on the Alpha's arm. The CEO was the first to get up. After washing up, he made a simple pot of oatmeal and left it simmering for his Omega. The gentle aroma of the oatmeal slowly roused Liam. Last night's events had been unexpected, and now the Omega felt a bit awkward. He and Ethan were just in an arranged marriage. They weren't actually in a relationship. What they did last night was improper. It was just a temporary mark, Liam told himself. He didn't expect the Alpha to take responsibility. After all, he was the one who had dialed the wrong number. He decided to speak up, to say they should just consider last night an accident. But the CEO leaned in and gave his Omega a kiss that tasted of fresh lemon toothpaste. He assured Liam that he would take full responsibility. He asked if he was still feeling unwell, and told him he must let him know. Liam's eyes widened slightly. The CEO, thinking his Omega was still recovering from the temporary mark, leaned in and kissed him again, his pheromones wrapping around Liam in a comforting embrace. Liam was speechless. Responsibility, but Ethan simply took the Omega's hand and confirmed it. He would be responsible. An idea struck the CEO. He remembered that couples often called each other husband or wife, so he leaned closer to Liam, kissing the corner of his mouth. He asked if he could call him his wife from now on. Wait, wasn't this moving a little too fast? Before Liam could react, the CEO continued, telling his wife that there was oatmeal warming in the kitchen. He explained that he'd followed a tutorial, And though he'd failed twice, the final result wasn't bad. He asked if he'd like to try it. Liam, in a daze, got up and had the oatmeal. Ethan watched him with bright eyes, like a large puppy, asking his wife how it was. Ethan had planned to stay home and comfort his Omega, who needed an alpha's presence after a temporary mark. But in the afternoon, he got a call from his assistant and had to go into the office. Before leaving, while tying his tie, he mentioned that his partner's spouse called him every night to come home for dinner. Liam, still resting, mumbled a reply. Ethan repeated it, stressing that it was every night. Liam acknowledged it. Ethan said it one more time. When Ethan got to the office, his partner had just returned from a meeting. The CEO glanced at his own suit, then casually took off his jacket and draped it over his chair. He thought for a moment, then unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. When his partner came in, he saw the CEO with his forearms exposed. The partner just glanced at him before focusing on the day's work. As they discussed a new project, his partner had the strange feeling that the CEO's arm was constantly flashing in his peripheral vision. And with every flash, the CEO would let out a small cough. The partner tried to ignore it, continuing to talk about a competitor's interest in the project. The CEO reached for a file, his arm flashing again. He coughed. The partner kept talking. The CEO handed the file back, arm flashing once more. More coughing. Finally, the partner couldn't take it anymore and looked directly at Ethan's arm. He noticed a faint red mark on the inner part of his forearm. He asked what happened to his arm. Ethan brushed it off. When his partner didn't press, the CEO casually brought his wrist closer, showing it off. He boasted that his family was clingy last night and had scratched him. He then asked his partner if his family was that clingy. Satisfied, he finally got back to work. That evening, Ethan was in another meeting. Unlike before, when he was completely focused, this time his phone was placed prominently on his right. As the minutes ticked by, his glances at the phone became more frequent, from every half hour to every 10 minutes, and finally to every 2 or 3 minutes. At 9:30, the sky was dark and a light rain began to fall. But the CEO's phone remained silent. The meeting ended and people began to file out. His partner's phone rang right on cue. The CEO pretended to be nonchalant, but his ears were pricked up. His partner answered, speaking softly to his baby, promising he'd be home soon. He mentioned the rain and listened as his partner arranged to be picked up. After the call, his partner came back to find the CEO staring grimly at his phone. He asked if Ethan wasn't leaving. Ethan shook his head, stating that he was also waiting for his baby. He said his baby had promised to call him, just like his partners had. The CEO held his phone, repeating it with conviction. He watched the minute hand on the screen's clock. With each rotation, the light in his eyes dimmed a little more. His partner had long since left. The CEO even watched from the window until the car's taillights disappeared into the rain. The minute hand kept turning. 1 circle. 2. 3. Meanwhile, Liam's heat hadn't fully subsided. After Ethan left for work, he had felt listless. After a temporary mark, it was natural for an Omega to be a bit dependent on their alpha. It wasn't about Liam depending on Ethan, he reasoned, but an Omega's instinctual reliance on an alpha's pheromones. It had nothing to do with feelings. It was a normal biological phenomenon. In the afternoon, Liam took a nap. When he woke up, it was already 9:30. He reached for his phone to check his messages and suddenly remembered Ethan's words from that morning. Every night? A phone call? Was he hinting at something? Liam couldn't figure it out. It was an arranged marriage. Calling late at night. It didn't seem appropriate. He hadn't thought much of it that morning, but after resting, he'd had time to think. Just as he'd analyzed before, they were both influenced by their pheromones. And Ethan's words, like "I'll take responsibility and call me," were surely a result of that. But remembering how many times Ethan had repeated his instructions, Liam opened his phone's dial pad. At 9:52 and 34 seconds, just as the CEO was about to burn a hole in his phone with his stare, the screen lit up and began to vibrate. The phone rang for less than a second before the alpha snatched it up. Liam was about to ask if he had calmed down, but the CEO shouted, "Honey, are you cold?" "I'm not cold. Thank you for worrying." His eyes lit up. He knew he would call. He'd been waiting for so long. When he left the office building, the employees were long gone. The CEO had been busy since the afternoon and hadn't eaten. But after receiving Liam's call, all he could think about was the delicate little cake the Omega made. The security guard at the front desk was fiddling with his keys when he saw the CEO rush out. The guard commented that he thought the company didn't usually work overtime. Ethan replied that today was an exception. The guard was about to go back to his phone when Ethan cleared his throat, pointedly gesturing to his watch and then to his phone. He explained that he was supposed to work late, but family kept calling him home. The guard, who didn't remember asking, was puzzled. Ethan then asked the guard if he wasn't going home. The sudden concern was strange, but the guard explained that he was on the night shift. Ethan's gaze softened with sympathy. He asked if the guard had to work the night shift all alone, and if his family didn't call him home. The guard pointed to a thermos on his desk and then to his phone. He said his wife had just brought him chili, jalapeno and beef. Delicious. He gave a thumbs up. He then asked the CEO if he had eaten. The CEO, who had been busy all day and had then spent hours pacing his office while starving, waiting for a phone call, mumbled that he hadn't. When the CEO got home, it was just past 10:15. He had cut the usual 30-minute drive down to 15. His voice preceded him through the door. "Honey, I'm home." Liam came down from upstairs, the tips of his ears slightly red. He didn't know if it was from nervousness or embarrassment. His voice was flat. "Don't call me honey." The CEO didn't understand. Taking off his watch, he looked at his Omega and asked if that meant he could only call him his wife. He thought for a moment, then neatly put his things down and walked back out the door. Liam, who had been too far away to hear clearly, was confused. The next second, he saw the Alpha repeat his arrival, his voice booming again before he even entered, but this time with a different term of endearment. The CEO opened the door and announced, "Wife, I'm home." He figured it was simple. Even in an arranged marriage, Liam was his Omega. As an Alpha, whatever his Omega said went. He obediently put his things away and looked at his Omega with a "see how well I listen? Aren't you going to praise me?" expression. He asked if this was okay, and if he could come in now. Liam looked down, that panicked feeling rising in his chest again. His lips parted. He wanted to say that terms like wife and honey were for people you actually loved. They were just in an arranged marriage. They couldn't use those names. But the thought made him feel inexplicably sad. He couldn't figure out why. In any case, he and Ethan weren't really together. After a moment, he told him just to use his name. The CEO, completely unaware of the turmoil in Liam's mind, was still basking in the joy of his Omega calling him home. But since his wife's word was law, he nodded in agreement. "Okay, wife." He scratched his head, looking a bit aggrieved. "Sorry, wife, it's just become a habit." He added that calling him by his name felt a bit distant. Liam's mind was a mess. They had been married for months, living separate lives, and a single, sudden heat had shattered everything. Felt like something was about to spiral out of control. The CEO changed his shoes, took off his watch, and went straight to the bathroom. When he came out from his shower, he saw the Omega staring into space. The effects of the temporary mark lingered, though the scent of pheromones on the Omega was fainter. The CEO walked over and subtly enveloped his Omega in his own pheromones. He was secretly pleased. So what if the security guard had chili? He had an Omega who would call him home, and he didn't have to work the lonely night shift. Plus, his Omega could make delicious cakes. The thought of cake made the CEO's stomach, which hadn't eaten all afternoon, protest loudly. He looked around expectantly, only to see a spotless kitchen and a refrigerator devoid of any leftovers. There was no little cake. Ethan sat back down next to Liam, looking like a pathetic, oversized puppy. "Wife, I haven't eaten yet." The puppy's hair tickled Liam's neck, and he was still Joje on the naming issue. He answered dismissively. He had already eaten. If he hadn't remembered the Alpha's repeated instructions to call, he would be asleep by now. The CEO's ears perked up at Liam's reply. According to the usual script, Liam should now say, "What would you like to eat? I'll make it for you." But the CEO waited and waited, and Liam said nothing more. He asked if he had anything else to say. Liam didn't understand. He thought for a moment and tentatively replied that he had already eaten. When the CEO still seemed unsatisfied, Liam thought perhaps he hadn't been specific enough. Remembering their polite, formal introductions, he dutifully reported on his dinner, listing the seafood congee, shrimp omelet, and scallion fish the housekeeper had made. Another loud growl came from the CEO's stomach. He was about to lose it. He leaned closer to Liam, rubbing his head against the Omega's neck. "Wife, I'm so hungry." Liam was ticklish and laughed, trying to stop the Alpha. He suggested Ethan go out to eat. But Ethan shook his head and held his Omega tighter, his voice low and full of manufactured pity. He told him that when he left work, the security guard was already eating dumplings his family had made. But he wasn't envious at all because his family could make cakes. He blinked at Liam and asked if he was right. Under the Alpha's puppy dog gaze, Liam found himself walking into the kitchen and, in a daze, agreeing to cook a bowl of noodles. He had started by the oven, instinctively reaching for a sieve and a whisk, before realizing they didn't have any of those things at home. In the end, under the CEO's pathetic gaze, Liam found half a packet of spaghetti and a few heads of bok choy in the pantry. He asked uncertainly if this would do. The housekeeper had just done a deep clean, and since neither of them ever cooked at home, the kitchen was her domain. Faced with the reality of making a meal with nothing, Ethan nodded. It was less Liam cooking and more the two of them figuring it out together. Liam unlocked an iPad and followed a recipe step by step while the CEO diligently washed the 2 heads of bok choy. By the time Liam had finished reading, the water in the pot was boiling. The steam was a bit thick. The CEO watched for a moment, then gently pushed Liam out of the way and tied on an apron himself. The noodles went in, tumbling in the boiling water. The CEO held a spoon in one hand and the salt shaker in the other. He tasted the broth, added some salt. Tasted it again, added more salt. Tasted it, added more. Liam, who had never cooked with anyone before, was watching in a daze when he heard the CEO mutter in confusion, asking if the salt had expired. Liam took the container and checked the date. He confirmed the expiration date was 3 years away, pointing to the numbers on the packaging. The CEO was still puzzled, wondering why it had no taste. Liam then watched as the CEO, after smacking his lips, continued to add another spoonful of salt to the pot. Then, he directly tasted the broth from the spoon in his hand, the same spoon that, perhaps, had not been back in the pot since the first taste. Ethan insisted it was tasteless. Liam looked at the CEO, words failing him. When Ethan asked what was wrong, Liam had to ask if he had been tasting the broth from that same spoon the whole time. The CEO asked if there was another spoon. Liam paused, then suggested that perhaps after adding salt, he needed to stir the pot and then take a new spoonful to taste. In the end, they didn't eat the noodles. The CEO, in a fit of pique, just boiled the unruined bok choy. Of course, Liam eventually ordered takeout for him. Dumplings, just like the security guard had. After the food arrived, Liam went upstairs. It was late. After eating, Ethan also returned to his own bedroom. They had always slept in separate rooms, except for the night of the accidental heat. After the temporary mark, Liam had gone back to his own room. He still carried the alpha's pheromones, which were territorial and possessive. Ethan's scent influenced him, and at this moment, Liam's mind was racing. But it didn't feel like it was just because of the pheromones. What else could it be? He sat on the edge of his bed for a while, sighed, and took out a bottle of pheromone neutralizer from his drawer. He didn't know what the CEO's intentions were. After all, it was just an arranged marriage. They didn't even know each other before the contract. Was the CEO acting this way just because of the pheromones? The thought saddened him, though it seemed that was how it was supposed to be. Maybe the scene of them cooking together earlier had felt too much like a real home, giving him the wrong idea. Liam's bedroom was off-limits to outsiders, including Ethan. During the temporary marking, they had been on the living room sofa before the CEO carried him to his own bedroom. If Ethan were to see Liam's room, he would surely be shocked, because it was less a bedroom and more like a hotel suite. Toiletries were all travel-sized, neatly arranged in the bathroom, as if they could be discarded at any moment. The closet was the same. Most of it was empty, save for one section with a few changes of clothes. A suitcase stood next to the closet, always ready. There were no personal trinkets. Besides Liam himself, there was almost no trace of him in the room. He looked around and suddenly thought of the large golden retriever rubbing against his neck. An unfamiliar feeling of guilt washed over him. Just as he was closing his eyes to rest, there was a rhythmic knock on the door. The CEO's voice came through the door, muffled. "Wife, can I come in? I think my rut is about to start." Liam shot up in bed, his first instinct to look around his stark, empty room. An arranged marriage was just an arranged marriage. The Omega had never treated this villa as his home. To the old Liam, this was perfectly normal. But now, the knocking interrupted his thoughts. The CEO, hugging his own pillow, stood outside, a wave of discomfort washing over him. He wasn't lying. His compatibility with Liam was high, and the recent temporary mark, while meant to soothe Liam, had also triggered an early onset of his own rut. The tall alpha leaned against the closed door, his shadow stretching long and lonely. Hearing no reply, the CEO knocked again. His voice, filtered through the door and roughened by his impending rut, sounded deep and mournful. That strange feeling returned to Liam. He touched the gland on the back of his neck. It was normal, not hot or flushed. His pheromones were completely under control. This meant he wasn't in heat, so why did he feel an urge to hug the alpha? It was strange. The CEO pressed his ear to the door, listening. After a brief silence, Liam suppressed the urge to embrace him and asked if he didn't have any suppressants. He waited, but instead of an answer, he heard a muffled grunt from the other side of the door. It was a sound of immense, suppressed pain. It was short, but it made Liam's face change instantly. He threw open the door, all thoughts of their arrangement forgotten, asking what was wrong. Before he could finish, he was pulled into the alpha's arms. The hand behind Liam's back subtly swiped a phone screen, closing the audio file named painful_grunt_001. An hour earlier, the Alpha, sensing something was off, had messaged his partner. He was taking a sick day tomorrow to get suppressants. His partner had laughed, asking if he still used those. When Ethan asked if he didn't, the partner replied that he had a wife. 30 minutes later, Ethan messaged again, asking if his wife helped him through his ruts. The partner's reply was slow, but eventually he just added the CEO to a group chat. The chat name, Research Group on the Dilemmas and Countermeasures Faced by Alphas in Winning an Omega's Heart in an Arranged Marriage Context. Ethan clicked on the group files and found a treasure trove. A guide to the art of playing pitiful 108 ways to be a scheming alpha, the Alpha Code of Conduct. He had struck gold. Back in the present, the CEO held his Omega tightly. Wife, holding you makes it better. I need you so much. Liam's ears turned red again. He told him not to be ridiculous. Ethan insisted he was telling the truth, that a wife was always important. This part wasn't from the tutorials. It was what his own father had taught him. He held up the pillow he was carrying and asked if he could sleep with him. Liam hesitated. Seeing his Omega's reluctance, Ethan's face fell. He said it was okay if they didn't sleep together. He asked if he could just sleep on the floor, as long as he could be near his wife. Liam felt like his tolerance for this arranged marriage partner was like water in a sponge. If you squeezed, there was always a little more to give. When Ethan held him, his first instinct was to push him away. It's just an arrangement, he repeated in his head. But they were too close, his heartbeat too loud, and it drowned out the words. The CEO's voice rumbled in his chest, so close Liam could feel the vibrations. Orange-scented pheromones gently wrapped around his fingertips, hesitant, as if afraid of being rejected. He asked again. Liam remembered a video he'd seen of a very good dog, gently nudging its owner for affection. It was a little pathetic. His fingers curled. Just for tonight. The CEO immediately agreed, happily hugging his pillow. Liam tried to tell him to wait so he could tidy up, but the Alpha was impatient. The bedroom door was pushed open. The air went still. The CEO, holding his pillow, blinked in confusion. He stepped back out, looked at Liam standing by the door, and confirmed this was his Omega's room. But why did it look like no one lived here? The TV and sofa were still covered in dust sheets. On the bedside table were single-use toiletries, exactly like in a hotel. The only sign of life was the bed itself, but even that was just simply made. The whole room felt cold and empty. This time, Liam was genuinely flustered. Though he couldn't pinpoint why, he tried to explain that he had just done a deep clean. The CEO looked at him, his expression unreadable. And then, the hand holding Liam's slipped away. Liam closed his eyes, an unexpected wave of sadness washing over him. He hadn't minded when Ethan held his hand, but now that he had let go, the spot where the Alpha's hand had been felt searingly hot. It made him even sadder. After a long silence, he heard the CEO ask if he had just packed. Liam didn't know how to answer. He felt a wave of self-pity and wanted to say that yes, he was ready to leave at any moment, that Ethan should just leave him alone. An arrangement was an arrangement, and he shouldn't give him false hope. He stared at his shoes, wanting to state it as a fact, but his throat tightened, and a lump formed in his nose. His vision blurred. Just as he was about to break, the CEO took his hand again. The Alpha's ears were a little red. Wife, I miss you too. Liam's tears retreated. What? The CEO continued, asking if he had packed everything because he wanted to move in with him. His Omega had packed so neatly. It must be so he could move into his room at a moment's notice. Just like how he had his pillow ready to come find him. It was a two-way street. He was so happy. Liam was even more confused. When had he said he missed him? In reality, Liam hadn't realized that when he tried to talk about leaving. His voice had trembled, barely a whisper. It was less a rational statement and more a cry of reluctance and sorrow. The CEO hadn't heard the whole sentence, just a few syllables that sounded like, "Miss you." So, his Omega had packed because he missed him? His Omega wanted to live with him too. Omegas were so cute. His family was clingy after all. As an alpha, he had to take the initiative. The next moment, under Liam's stunned gaze, the alpha swiftly grabbed the ready-to-go suitcase and, along with Liam himself, bundled them up and carried them back to his own bedroom. It happened so fast that, by the time Liam came to his senses, he was standing at the threshold of the CEO's room. The CEO tidied his own bed and then sat on it, enthusiastically waving Liam over. "Wife, please, come in." His enthusiasm was so intense that Liam hesitated. He considered the possibility of just grabbing his suitcase and going back. But in the few seconds he thought about it, the CEO had already patted the bed 5 times. "Wife, wife, wife." In the end, unable to refuse such a fervent invitation, Liam walked in. Once inside, he realized just how absurd the evening had become. Was he cohabiting with Ethan now? Although they were legally married, living together was not only acceptable but expected. But they were just in an arranged marriage. In their social circle, many entered such arrangements, but few made it to the end. On the contrary, most ended in resentment and shared beds with separate dreams. And if one party developed feelings, the ending was always more tragic. Liam didn't want that. From the beginning, he had warned himself. It was just an arrangement. He admitted he was a pessimist when it came to love, especially when starting a relationship with a stranger. Their marriage was a contract, a formality. It wouldn't last long. When the contract expired, they would go their separate ways. If only Ethan wasn't holding him right now. The moment he stepped into the room, before he could react, he was pulled into the alpha's arms. The alpha was already in his rut, and the heat from Ethan's body seared him, his heart feeling as if it were engulfed in a warm current. He let out a startled sound. Ethan, having acted first, patted the Omega's back soothingly. He asked his wife to let him hold him for just a little while. Just a little. Liam agreed. The CEO, after a moment, glanced at the lone suitcase. An idea sparked. He got off the bed and cleared out half of his own closet. He told his wife that this side would be for her things, that side for his, and the middle for things they both used. He asked what his wife thought. Liam, who had very few possessions, couldn't think of a reason to object and nodded. This seemed to energize Ethan. He remembered his theoretical studies. Facing one's Omega, an alpha must, at all times and in all places, make their Omega feel the warmth of home. He understood. No one who felt at home lived out of a suitcase. He efficiently opened Liam's suitcase. When he got to the toiletries, he paused for a second at the travel-size bottles but said nothing. He cheerfully placed Liam's things next to his own, even arranging them by size. The clothes were kept separate, but the CEO secretly laced his pheromones onto them. The suitcase slowly emptied, and by the time Liam realized what was happening, his belongings had been neatly arranged by the CEO. The clear boundaries were broken. He asked his wife if he had done a good job. Unsure if his actions counted as warmth, he hesitated for a second and then turned on the air conditioner to heat. As the warm air blew on Liam's face, the CEO finally nodded in satisfaction. Liam thought he should probably be happy too. If it weren't currently 98 degrees outside, the heat was blowing directly on him, and he was already starting to sweat. He asked his wife if he felt the warmth of home. Liam agreed that it was very warm. So warm, in fact, that he felt like he was living on the sun. Less than 5 minutes later, the AC was back to blowing cold air. The next morning at 6 o'clock, Liam woke up in a solid embrace. One of the Alpha's hands was draped over his waist, the other gently patting his head. He suggested they sleep a little longer. Ethan raised a hand to block the sliver of sunlight peeking through the curtains from Liam's eyes, and Liam drifted back to sleep. That night, after showering, Liam had picked up a book. The sound of the shower running in the bathroom was distracting. The words on the page, usually calming, seemed to blur. The scent of oranges in the room grew stronger, mixed with the humidity from the bathroom. He closed the book, unsettled. He knew his unusual mood was likely influenced by Ethan. They had a temporary bond, and their emotions could affect each other, which meant the person who was truly agitated was Ethan. It was more than just agitation. It was a boundless heat, a deep craving. Liam wanted to run again. He knew how dangerous it was for an Omega to be in the same room with an Alpha about to enter his rut, even with a temporary bond, even if they were married. But he was still uneasy. The Alpha stood under the shower, the water as cold as it would go. He was clearly in his rut now. A voice in his head told him his Omega was just outside the door, that he could mark him, possess him completely. A reddish tint crept into the Alpha's eyes. His hand gripped the doorknob, about to press down. But then he saw the toiletries lined up on the counter, from largest to smallest. Those little bottles. The veins on the back of his hand stood out. He sighed, released the doorknob, and stepped back under the icy water. An hour later, the Alpha emerged, having fitted himself with a bite guard. He kept his head down, his voice raspy from his rut. "Wife." Liam sensed the overwhelming pheromones and instinctively backed away. But Ethan was the first to retreat, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture, standing a safe distance away. He promised, his voice low and earnest, that he would never, ever hurt him. Liam was stunned. The bite guard was a bit too small, leaving red marks on the Alpha's face. Ethan approached him cautiously. Liam could feel the change in the pheromones in the air. They weren't aggressive, but soft and comforting, like a warm blanket. Ethan was trying his best to soothe him. He asked Liam to trust him. And inexplicably, Liam's anxiety melted away. He nodded and slowly, tentatively, began to release his own calming pheromones. The rest of the night was quiet. At first, Ethan was in agony, and when he held Liam, he would unconsciously move closer to the Omega's gland. But the bite guard prevented him from doing anything more than gently nuzzling his neck. The metal was cool against his skin, but it felt scalding to Liam, and he flinched. Ethan immediately apologized, freezing in place. He mumbled that he was having a little trouble controlling himself, but promised he would, and told his wife not to be afraid. Liam just hummed in response. True to his word, the Alpha simply held him. Later that night, he took several more cold showers. Only when his pheromones had stabilized did he remove the bite guard, use a suppressant on himself, and then lean in to gently kiss Liam's lips. Liam, exhausted, was already asleep and didn't respond, simply turning over. The Alpha then smoothly kicked Liam's comforter to the floor and pulled him into his own. When Liam fully awoke, Ethan was gone. He was wrapped in the Alpha's comforter, inevitably scented with his pheromones. The sweet orange scent seeped into him. Everything was spiraling out of his control, but strangely, he felt no aversion. He sat in a daze for a moment before getting up to wash. At the sink, he couldn't find his own travel-sized toothpaste. Next to it was a new, unopened tube with a note stuck to it in the Alpha's handwriting. It explained that he had accidentally knocked Liam's toothpaste off the counter and couldn't find where it had rolled, hoping Liam would use this one for now. Liam was puzzled but didn't think much of it and opened the new toothpaste. As he brushed his teeth, the flavor felt strangely familiar. Back in the bedroom, he saw the bite guard on the nightstand. He poked it with his finger, and the metal buckle made a soft clinking sound. Ethan appeared at the doorway and asked if he was awake. Liam nodded, then asked if he was feeling better. Much better, Ethan replied, walking over with a glass of warm water. The red marks from the bite guard were still visible on his nose and the side of his face. Liam felt his face grow warm under the Alpha's gaze. His eyes darted away and landed on the comforter on the floor. He didn't usually kick his blankets off. He asked if he had done it last night. Ethan coughed. He remembered his own smooth kick from the night before. His theoretical studies had been thorough. The group files said there was nothing a kiss couldn't solve. And if there was, then kiss for half an hour. So, just as Liam was lost in thought, a kiss landed on the corner of his mouth. Before he could react, another followed. It started as a light touch, then became more insistent until his lips parted, and the Alpha deepened the kiss. The familiar lemon flavor. Liam finally remembered why the toothpaste had seemed familiar. It was the same as the Alpha's. A coincidence? Or was it just an accident? The thought flashed through his mind, but he soon lost the capacity to think about it. When Liam was completely limp in his arms, the Alpha finally pulled back and politely apologized. He confessed that he had been the one to kick the comforter to the floor. He explained that last night, Liam had been hugging the comforter instead of him for 37 minutes straight, which was basically an hour. He reasoned that a night only has so many hours, and he felt neglected, which is why he had. Liam couldn't help but finish his sentence, asking if he had committed a crime most Alphas would commit. Ethan immediately denied it, insisting he adhered to the Alpha code. He then cleared his throat and continued his explanation, promising to wash the comforter and asking his wife not to be angry with him. Liam's face was beet red. He had no energy to be angry. His hands felt awkward, and the faint taste of lemon lingered on his lips. Ethan took his hand and asked again, his voice soft, for him not to be angry. At the bathroom sink, Liam stared at another note and sighed. After a series of accidents, his travel-sized toiletries were almost gone. His body wash had been the first casualty last week, forcing him to switch to the same brand as the CEO. Now, his shampoo was also missing, and the CEO's notes were becoming more eloquent. Obviously, the new shampoo was also a matching set. Before, Liam had kept everything packed in his suitcase. Now, his things were scattered throughout the bedroom, and the ever-ready suitcase had disappeared, replaced by a shared closet, books placed side by side, and tangled charging cables. Wait, the charging cables. Liam looked at the mismatched cable in his hand and sighed. He had taken the Alpha's charger by mistake. And at the office, the Alpha was holding an equally mismatched charger. He usually kept a spare at work, but he had forgotten to bring it back from his last business trip. He'd brought his home charger in that morning, worried he might miss a call from his family. When his partner walked in, he saw the CEO staring intently at a charging cable. He asked what was so interesting. The CEO coolly blocked his hand, stating that this was no ordinary cable. It was his family's. His partner was unimpressed. The CEO then eagerly asked if he wanted to know the mystery of how their two unrelated charging cables became so intimately intertwined. His partner tried to refuse, but the CEO stared him down until he agreed. The CEO then happily shared the results of his recent studies and practices, proudly showing off the neatly printed and annotated group files on his desk. He boasted about his extensive notes. His partner just smiled thinly and asked if he had seen the project proposal he had sent. The CEO rustled through some papers and found it. He admitted that dating was busy work. He had almost forgotten he owned a company. His partner, who had been pulling double duty, just walked away. That night, the CEO happily received a call from his family. He and his partner stood at opposite ends of the hallway. One called out honey, and the other, not to be outdone, yelled wife into the phone. Liam's birthday was at the end of the year, the busiest time. He hadn't mentioned it to Ethan. But on the morning of his birthday, he woke up to a bouquet of fiery red roses. The CEO, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, was holding the flowers and balancing precariously on a ridiculously colorful hoverboard. He waved cheerfully. "Hi, wife. Good morning. Are you awake?" He stumbled, nearly hitting the doorframe. That certainly woke Liam up. As Ethan got closer, Liam noticed the colorful cloud he was riding. The graffiti on the hoverboard looked homemade. He stared at a strange blob on it for a long time but couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be. The alpha handed him the flowers and asked him to guess how many there were. Liam, thinking roses were about love, guessed 99. The CEO looked proud and announced that there were exactly 100. For a long and healthy life. He added that his partner had also suggested 99, but he had quickly changed it to 100. He beamed, wishing his wife eternal happiness. Liam smiled faintly and replied that if he wasn't turning 25, he might be happier about it. That evening, the CEO told him to close his eyes for another surprise. As they were about to leave, Ethan pulled him back and carefully wrapped a scarf around his neck. The proximity made Liam a little uncomfortable. He asked quietly if they were just going out for dinner. Ethan frowned, saying it was no ordinary birthday. Liam was confused, asking if anyone's birthday wasn't an annual event. Ethan thought about it and realized he was right, but that wasn't important. He led Liam by the hand into the backyard. The yard was transformed. Blue and white balloons hung from the tree branches. A string of warm yellow lights led to the center of the yard, where two cartoonish snowmen stood. They were imperfectly made, but one could clearly see the resemblance to Liam and Ethan. The two snowmen were holding hands, and one of them held a heart. The CEO led the Omega to the snowman and told him to open his eyes. Liam looked at the snowman, then at Ethan, and asked if he had made them. He wondered if he had been cold. Ethan didn't answer, instead casually raising his own hands, which were red from the cold. He said it didn't matter as long as his wife was happy. The next second, Liam took his hand, his own warm palm enclosing the alpha's cold one. After a moment, the CEO took the heart from the snowman and placed it in Liam's hand. The snow melted from the warmth of his palm, water trickling through his fingers, leaving behind a ring that sparkled in the dim light. The CEO knelt on one knee, looked into the Omega's eyes, and asked seriously, "Liam, will you be my Omega?" He clarified that he wasn't asking as a Vance or as part of their arrangement, but as Ethan. He had hidden all those travel-sized bottles, used up a whole box of sticky notes, all in the hope that Liam would have more reasons to stay, that he wouldn't just see this as a temporary arrangement, a stopover. The CEO was rarely so serious. "Liam," he said, "I really like you." Liam's fingers curled. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out of his chest. But the feeling wasn't unfamiliar. He felt it every time he was with Ethan. His lips moved, as if asking himself, "Like?" Ethan gave him a firm answer. "Yes, like. I like you. Not as an arrangement. Just like." Liam opened his hand. The snow had long since melted. How could it not, in so much warmth? He looked up. The small lights in the yard were like a canopy of stars, their light reflected in his eyes. He saw the same warm light in the Alpha's eyes, along with a steady, unwavering conviction. The Omega closed his hand around the ring in his palm. "I will," Liam said, and then he added, a soft realization in his voice, "So this is what it feels like."